People move their eyes around all the time, don't they? That might seem like a fairly obvious thing to say. Well, I'm not talking about eye movements in terms of somebody looking at something and saying, oh, there's a table or there's a chair. I'm not talking about those sort of eye movements. I'm talking about when somebody's thinking, when they're thinking and when their eyes move. What's going on there? Well, what's happening is their eyes are leading the search in their mind, in their brains, for information. They're searching for information in their head. They're trying to remember, trying to get memories, or they're trying to construct something in their minds. It's all part of our thinking. What the eyes are doing is they're searching using the different senses that we have. Senses of being able to see, visualizing. They're searching for information internally to do with sounds, our auditory senses. And they're also searching for information in our feelings, how we feel, how we would feel, or how we felt about something. They're leading the search for this type of information. So, if you can understand somebody's eye movements, you can get to know a lot about them. Do you think that might be useful? You might have noticed when you've been talking to somebody, discussing something, or an idea, or a project, or a product of yours, you might have noticed that they look up and they'll say, I can see that. What they're actually doing there is they're using their eyes to access their visual sense, and they're making a picture of what you're talking about. They might also say something like, and they move their eyes along the horizontal, that just doesn't sound right. And they move their eyes along the horizontal. And in that case, they're accessing their auditory sense, their hearing sense. Or they might say, I just don't get a good feeling about that, and they look down. In that case, they're accessing their feelings or their kinesthetic sense, their feelings. So people will give you a good idea of not what they're thinking about, but how they're thinking if you watch their eye movements. Let's have a look at the chart here. You're looking at this as if you were observing the eye patterns of another person. On the left-hand side, you've got constructed or imagined or made up pictures, sounds, and you've got feelings. On the right-hand side, you've got recalled or remembered pictures, sounds, and you've also got self-talk. Top left is visual construct. These are images that are made up or that you've never seen before. Somebody might ask you a question, something like, what are you going to do at the weekend? And as you're thinking about it, you might go, I'm thinking of going for a nice walk actually. And so you're constructing in your mind an image of what you're going to be doing. Top right is visual recall. And if somebody asks you a question like, what were you doing a week ago last Tuesday? Then your eyes might shoot up to the right as you recall the memory of what you were doing. So you're seeing images from memory. Centre left is auditory construct. These are sounds that you've not heard before. So if I were to ask you to think about listening to my voice as if I was Donald Duck, then your eyes might shoot off to the left as you thought about that. Centre right is auditory recall, and these are remembered sounds that you've heard before. Bottom left is kinesthetic or your feelings, and if I was to ask you to tell me how you feel about something, then you might look down and to your left as you thought about that. Or it also applies to a sense of taste, touch and smell. So if you're remembering smells that you've smelled before, then you might look down and to your left. Down and to your right is auditory digital, AD, And this is your self-talk, your internal dialogue. So if you were to think of a list of all the things that you need to do today, then as you think of that list, as you check mentally down the list to see which ones you've completed, then I might see you look down and to the right. Now that you know about these eye movements, you're going to be observing them in people all the time. And there are one or two things to bear in mind. The first one is that they happen really quickly sometimes. So if you're asking somebody a question and you're going to observe their eye movements as a response to your question, then you need to be looking at them as you ask the question. Otherwise, the eye movement might already have taken place without you noticing it. They dart around the eyes really, really quickly as people access the information. Also, you might ask somebody a question and you'll notice that they defocus their eyes as they think about the answer. So they'll defocus and then they'll give you the answer. And in this case, the chances are that the accessing of the information was quite simple for them. So they didn't need to go to the part of the brain where the information was stored in order to get the answer. It just came to them quite easily. You might also notice that sometimes people's eyes dart in one direction and then go in another. This could be because they're accessing two hemispheres of the brain at the same time. So, say for example, I said to somebody, see how you feel about this. Seeing and feeling two different parts, two different eye movements. So you might see somebody go as they see how they feel. It's also possible that you might ask somebody a question that leaves them completely flummoxed. And if that's the case, you might see the eyes do the full tour as they seek out the answer to your question in vain normally. Let's have a look at this. Okay. We're going to do an eye pattern elicitation. So I'm going to ask you some questions. If you just look straight ahead, that would be great. And then when I ask you the questions, no need to answer them to me out loud, but just think of the answer in your head, if that's okay with you.
Okay.
Great. So what was the colour of the room that you grew up in? Thank you. What was the colour of the front door of the house that you grew up in? Thank you. What would your car look like if it was bright pink? Thank you. When you were growing up, did you have a favourite pet? And if you did, what was the sound of your pet's voice? Thank you. What was the very last thing that I said? Thank you. And what would I sound like if I had Donald Duck's voice? Thank you. Can you say the 7 times table to yourself? Thank you. Now, have you got a favourite beach or a place in the outdoors where you go walking? What does it feel like, or what would it feel like to walk there without any shoes on? Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You can have a lot of fun with these eye movements. They can be really useful in building rapport, building relationships with people. Because if you can demonstrate that you're on the same wavelength with somebody, then that's going to get you great rapport. Say, for example, you're in a conversation with somebody and they look up. You can say to them, does that look right to you? And unconsciously, they're going to think that you're on their wavelength. And that's going to build rapport. If they look horizontally, you can say, does that sound right to you? Or if they look down to their feelings, you can say, do you get a good feeling about this? Or they look down to their self-talk, their auditory digital, then you can say, does this make sense to you? And unconsciously, that's going to build rapport. If they respond and say, it just doesn't look right, and you're in a selling environment, then you know that you've got some more work to do in order to build a better mental picture for them of what you're proposing. So you can use these in one-to-one meetings, in sales meetings, and you can also use them to establish whether or not somebody's telling the truth. Let me give you an example. If you ask somebody what they were doing 2 weeks ago on Wednesday and they look up here, then you know that they're probably telling the truth. If you ask them the same question and they look up here, then you've got to wonder whether or not they're constructing their answer, whether or not they're telling the truth. And the author, Peter James, in his books with a police inspector, Roy Grace, talks about using them for this very purpose.